as we welcome the founder, Springtime Leadership Foundation, and the senior pastor of Transforming Church, Reverend Sam Oye.
All right, this looks like a very tall order for me. When you hear that you have a professor from the university where you graduated from, you will have to be very careful lest your degree be revoked if you misbehave. Couple the fact that I studied geology, so I took a course in your department. Yes, Fortran. Incidentally, we didn't touch computer until we graduated. But we took the course. It's just that we didn't touch the computer, sir. So, standing on all existing protocol, I want to honor the Honorable Minister, who is also doubling up for the Vice President, who is not here today. So nice to see the Honorable Minister again. I was with you at Venture Platform when it was opened. I also honor here in our midst all the other special guests who are seated. I don't want to go into mentioning names. Incidentally, when we're in the green room, so much has been discoursed, and I was listening about smart cities and the rest of that. And then also conversations began to tailor towards the recent elections in the United States. How did Donald Trump, come about when everybody thinks or thought he was never going to make it? And it became very obvious in the end that social media played a very vital role. Because if you noted, during Obama's time, social media. And what they did in Obama's time was that they used what we call demographic survey. In Trump's time, he allowed Hillary to depend so much on demographic survey, which has to do with what is the voting population that is disenfranchised. And unfortunately for Hillary, she absolutely relied on what Obama used, which was to say that from 1976 down until when he came on board, there was this voter apathy, particularly among young people. So they decided that, look, based on analytics, again, they decided that why don't you reach out to the young people, since we know we cannot face the might of the Republican Party, particularly when the Republican Party chooses to bring on board the factor of religion. So they decided to play the game to the young people. And that was why he had to, in fact, the theme for his campaign was called Trendy. I was fortunate to sit with his campaign manager in Virginia at the Center for Constitutional Studies in the United States. And he was talking to us about how these things work. And he made us understand how that he had to fold his shirt, use his BlackBerry. It was all intentionally designed to reach the young people. Now, when it got to the time of Trump, Hillary decided to bank on that demographic survey, and Trump decided to move differently, reached out to analytical, and they came up with psychographic survey, which has to do with the mindset of Americans. And they realized that even those who were Democrats really didn't like the way Democrats were handling things. So they played to the mind of the blue-collar workers, reached out to them in the interiors, working on their minds with people like Steve Bannon and those who are into the nationalist and populist movement. And all of that eventually led to a situation whereby Donald was making a statement, nobody was getting it. He kept on saying, I have my secret voting block. No, nobody got it. But eventually everybody was shocked. You see, it is with that that I come to say this. If social media, ICT played a significant role, I want to let you know that it can still play a significant role in Africa, in the development of Africa. And so to that end, I want to quickly make us understand when it comes to African tech renaissance, one of the things that I found out was the fact that the word renaissance in itself actually captures the transitional period in classical European time, particularly in their historical moments between the 14th and 17th century, during which they had a major growth by virtue of the fact that there was a surge, a renewed interest in things like sciences, technology, arts, and literature. That moved Europe to a whole new dimension. Therefore, when it comes to this word renaissance that we have up there, so that doesn't sound like another big word. It's just another word for rebirth. Meaning something was there before, something went wrong. Can we bring it back again? Another word for it might be revive. Another word for it might just be to reawaken. All of this presupposes that Africa has the DNA in itself that can make Africa grow again. Let me put it this way. I happened to grow up in a state. I was born in Kaduna. I schooled in a place called Bauchi, even though my parents were from the West. And I did a little bit of farming. And one of the things that I noted was that close to my farm, I remember back in the 80s, there was this tree that was obstructing the path towards where we normally farm. And so one day I came back and I found that the tree had been cut from the trunk. And we were quite excited that this obstruction is forever gone. A few months later, I noticed that some plants began to bud shortly after the springs began. And I said, what's going on here? Oh, and then it came to my mind that you can cut off the trunk, but if you don't take out the root, the tree will grow again. And that brings to this understanding that the root of technological development, creativity, and innovation is deep on the inside of us. We didn't need to go to any university, no MIT, no Harvard, no Oxford. We didn't need to go to any of that. It was in us. If you go to the Benins, you go to Edo State in the early days, you get to find that craft, designs, all of that was in us. How did we make the things that we make? How did we arrange the pyramids, the granites in Kano? How did we arrange them in such a way that they form the shape that they shape if there's no mathematical thinking? You see, the point is that we have looked down too much on ourselves, and obviously because somebody has told us, like she said, apes obey, I think it's time for us to tell ourselves we are not apes anymore. It's time for us to tell ourselves that we were the one that mined in Plateau. We were the ones that had cocoa in the western part of Nigeria. We did all kinds of things to preserve them. Where are the Nigerians who did that? Our fathers may be gone, but their genes are still in us. And what that portends is that if the tree can have rain, even though it's been cut off, it will grow again. If we can have an enabling environment, the genes of our fathers that made us to build the things that we built in the years gone by, the genes are still in us. That's why if you take us out of here and you take us to somewhere like America, we blossom again. It's all about the environment. And so I challenge everyone here today to begin to think about this whole concept on Renaissance. You see, because when you think about the word itself, African Renaissance, it actually has to do with predicting the future of Africa. It firmly affirms the fact that we African people and nations shall indeed rise out of the ashes of our wasted decades to overcome the numerous challenges confronting the continent and thereafter achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal. So African Renaissance actually is what leads to what we call African Tech Renaissance. So if you look at the phrase carefully, African Renaissance, which has to do with African rebirth, revival, reawakening, you see, it was first articulated by a man called Diop in a series of essays that he put together between 1946 and 1960, all of which are now put together in his book that is titled Towards the African Renaissance, Essays in Culture and Development. You see, he made us understand that in order for Africa to grow, there needs to be what we call the African Renaissance Institute. Thabo Mbeki, the former leader of South Africa, decided to do something. He said, look, let's not just talk about African Renaissance. Let's not just talk about growth, reawakening. Can we put together some key elements that will define this Renaissance? I thought Thabo Mbeki did a fantastic job. Because again, Africans, we like cliches, we like fads, we like, hypes and the rest of that. He said, can we bring it down to the lowest denominator? What are the key deliverables? How do you know that Renaissance is taking place in a place? These are the key indicators. Number one, he said there will be social cohesion. Once there's Renaissance, there will be social cohesion. I don't see a Kaduna man. I don't see an Ogun State man. I see a Nigerian first. There's going to be social cohesion. There's going to be democracy. There will be economic rebuilding. There will be growth. There will also be the establishment of Africa as a significant player in the global space. Having said that, let me take it a little bit further by stating that in order to achieve what Thabo Mbeki has stated as the key deliverables, it is important for us to realize that technology is what's going to cause us to leapfrog to achieve all of those things almost at the same time. It is what technology can make happen. We don't have time anymore in Africa to wait until we do this, then after we do that, we then do the other. Technology has made it possible in such a way that you can be having all of them happening almost at the same time. We need to leverage on technology and leapfrog Africa into the Committee of Nations where it truly belongs. In his book, The African Renaissance History, Significant Strategy, Professor W.A.J. Okumu said this when they were commissioning the African Renaissance Institute in South Africa. He said, and I quote, "The most important and primary role of the African Renaissance Institute now and in the coming years is to gather a critical mass," please take note, "of first-class African scientists and to give them large enough grants on a continuing basis as well as sufficient infrastructure to enable them undertake meaningful problem-solving research and development applied to industrial production that will lead to really important results and economic dimensions, end of quote. Let me tweak it a little bit and make it more contemporary for our time. And I'll put it this way from my own personal quoting. He said, and I will rephrase, that the most important and primary role of African leaders in the public and private sector, now and in the coming years, must be to gather a critical mass of first-class African scientists and techites, Nigerian scientists and techites. Give them large enough grants on a continuing basis as well as infrastructure, sufficient infrastructure, to enable them to undertake meaningful problem-solving research and development for economic transformation of the African continent in this digital age, which you call the gig economy. You see, with Africa's rising population of about 1.2 billion, which has been rehearsed over here, it is estimated that by 2025, a quarter of the global population aged 24 and below will be living, take note of that by 2025, a quarter of the entire globe of people living under 24 will be living in sub-Saharan Africa, thereby setting the stage for sub-Saharan Africa's population to be the youngest in the world by 2035. It's amazing to know that while Europe is talking about the shrinking in birth rate, we are talking about an explosion in terms of our young people. It is therefore critical to note that with that explosion comes an enormous workforce that can transform the entire continent from a third world to a first world like no other development has ever taken place on the planet called Earth. If only we will leverage technology. It will only happen if these young people that we talk about, if they are provided with the necessary skills, required space, the timely support, and continuous supply of basic infrastructure. I meet our young people. Let me give you an example of a young man called Uche, who is currently in Dallas. Uche finished from Kogi Polytechnic, where he studied something around computer. And then he came over to Abuja and he served, and I got to meet with him and I started mentoring him. Eventually, he went to the United Kingdom for his master's. And after he was done with his master's, he applied for Game Store for a competition. And he came overall best, moved over to the United States. And Uche began to work with Cisco and the rest of them. Long and short of it, I was with Uche about 2 years ago. And he said, I'd like to take you to a project I undertook. And he took me to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, which is the 5th largest hospital in the entire world. And when we got in there, I said, why did you bring me here? And he said, sir, I just want to show you what the boy you mentored has accomplished. I said, what is it? Did you build this place? And he said to me, sir, no. He said, the entire ICT infrastructure of this hospital was designed by me for Cisco. He said, so much so, yes, so much so now that Cisco has adopted what he designed, and Cisco is now using that. It was so impressive that Citibank, whilst I was there with him in Dallas, Citibank called on him and they said, you know what, young man, we'd like you to be our vice president ICT. That is a young boy from this particular country who happened to find an environment that made it happen for him. There are many Uches in our country. We may not be able to change the world, but if you create a space and just allow one Uche to blossom, you never can tell how many lives you can change. It's amazing to talk about Mark Zuckerberg, but there are greater than Mark Zuckerbergs in this country. If only given the right environment, great things can happen. You know, our young people are creative. Our young people are not lazy. Our young people are not indolent. Our young people are not backward. Our young people are not retrogressive. I meet them everywhere. Our young people carry wood, they carry stone. I was part of them, I'm still part of them. We work overnight. We don't study under normal conditions. We use lamps, we use candles. We stay overnight in schools to read. Given the same environment with our competitors, no wonder we're having scholarships abroad, because we now suddenly realize that the environment wherein we thrive is not a normal environment. Therefore, I want to quickly challenge us here to realize that because our young people are creative and innovative, why are they so? The DNA of their tech-savvy ancestors still stay on the inside of them. At this point, let me turn over to Dr. Evans and tell you that I join you. Wakanda. Wakanda. We can build it. Funny enough, as you watch Wakanda, it happens to be that the person behind the whole engineering was a young girl. When the man who came from the outside world saw her, and he said, "Who's this little girl?" And she just made a mess of him, because don't underestimate me. I'm an African child who's gone through so much trouble. My mother had to go to farm in order for me to go to school, so I carry upon me the burden of making my family walk. We are Wakandas. We make things happen. All we just need is somebody put us in that glass environment. Create those computers. Make sure the light is there. You'll be amazed what we can do. My honorable minister, sir, you have come into this country at such a time as this. Nobody has ever been saddled with the burden of the next generation of Nigerians like you. May I humbly submit, sir, that if you never accomplish anything in your lifetime, please do one thing for us. Create the space in all our geopolitical regions where our young people can go into, I'm talking about, sir, it won't cost you anything, my honorable minister. All you need to do, sir, is to use your political might. Just use your office to compel Chevron, to speak to MTN, to talk to Glow and the rest of them. Can they set up a technological space? They can afford it. Where our young people from low-income families but with creative abilities can be chosen from the best schools. My son is interested in robotics. I can send him to such a school. But how about children who can't do that? Must they give up their dreams and pick up a mechanic job because their parents can't afford it? A young boy very close to my building, he said to his dad, "Dad, I want to go and study aeronautic engineering." The father called him to the side and said, "My son, change your dream." He said, "Because you're not the only one that I have, and it will cost so much to train you. I have others." How many are giving up their dreams to set up robotics? See our little kids, my honorable minister. Young people sitting down using rope to create planes that flies on our streets. Isn't somebody taking note of them? Sir, you have come into this dispensation at such a time as this. This is the only reason why, long after you have left government, young people will not stop coming to your house. Because of the impact you made before you left. I therefore challenge that we consider that as our noble venture. Let me tidy it up with the words of Maya Organ Famodu, a Nigerian American who once said, she said, the last frontier market is Africa. A young girl, she said, the last frontier market is Africa. You see, although it may seem slow now, Africa is now on the rise. It may look like it's very slow, but trust me, we're growing. Our future is irreversibly bright. The key is this. It is in your interest that you line up with the next generation. Otherwise, with or without you, they will become all that they were destined to be. It is therefore critical for you to line up with this next generation of Nigerian kids so that they will remember you in the narrative of our development. A critical mass of African techites are emerging all over the country. The creative and innovative roots of the African people is being revived from the locals in Rwanda, To the diaspora in the Republic of Ireland, progressive and proactive government in some African countries are now not only making policies or tech-friendly policies, they are not just doing that. What they are also doing is they are making available grants for startups. Hence, they are experiencing significant growth and development from Mauritius to Seychelles to South Africa to Cape Verde, Rwanda, Botswana. Growth taking place because their government don't just make tech-friendly policies, they also make monies available. The educational sectors of these countries are not left behind. They have decided not to make an education to be the end, but education to be a means by which you accomplish an end. Why should we be sitting down in the classroom or in the Ministry of Education coming up with curriculum without consulting the industries that will be the end users? You see, our educational sector must reverse the sequence. To develop a curriculum, the way it is being done in progressive worlds is that to develop a curriculum now, you go to the end user, you go to MTN, you go to the automobiles, you go to the tech industries and say, what kind of skills do you need? And those are the skills that we develop curriculum around. Why use an analog curriculum to develop children for a digital age? As I close with these few words, think about this. Our educational sector, recent research has shown that there are 4 major skills that will define the jobs of the future. Number 1 is critical thinking skills. Number 2 is creative thinking skills. Number 3 is interpersonal relationship skill. Number 4 is communication skills. Our schools must begin to focus on creative thinking skills. Stop dumping notes on kids and asking them to reproduce them. You are destroying their creative thinking abilities. It's time to engage the mind of our children. The private sector is not left behind. We celebrate all of you, our tech chairmen, wonderful people who are doing great work with the tech industry side. We celebrate you. And Andela, who are taking our young people and turning them over into mighty software engineering guys and gurus. I want to say that we need more private sector involvement in driving the whole of this, is creating hubs where our young people can go to practice so that our young people can take advantage of what we call the technology value pyramid, which includes becoming pioneers, strategists, becoming solution providers, service enhancers, and ICT educators. We can do it. We can do it. Africa, we did it before. We can do it again. Let us remind our children as we live here. Tell them that we built the boats that sailed across the oceans before Europeans began to sail across the oceans. Remind our children, tell them that we developed the vaccines that brought an end to yellow fever. Tell our kids that we did that. Tell our children that we were the ones that developed the CAT scanner, the CT scanner. Tell them we did that. It may come in glossy white containers today. Tell them it came from a black mind. Am I talking to someone here? It's important that we tell our kids that we performed the first human-to-human heart transplant. Tell them we did that. Tell our children that we developed the first crystallographic electron microscopy technique that transformed 2-dimensional images into 3-dimensional. Tell them we did that. The world will not tell them. We have to tell them. We have to tell them. It's incumbent upon us to tell our own story because nobody will tell our story better than we can do. The list goes on and on. Tell our young people that we did it before, we can do it again, with the government creating the enabling environment, the private sector driving the initiatives, schools preparing curriculums for the future, and families giving their children enabling environment. I see a new day dawning for Africa. God bless digital Africa. God bless Nigeria. And God bless Africa. Thank you so very much.
It's a standing one. It's a standing one. Don't be stingy. It's a standing one. It's a standing one. We did it before. We can do it again. We did it before. We can do it again. The time is now. Woo! Can you now say, oh yeah? Aha! Please have your seats. Woo! Ah.